We've got a great guest for you today, Zach, co-founder and CEO of Plaid. Let's listen. Tell me your story from growing up. Tell me from the top, North Carolina, everything.
Totally. So I grew up a small town in North Carolina. It was about a 10,000 person town, kind of about half an hour, 40 minutes outside of a 200,000 person town. So, a small town outside of a...
What would be the version of that in San Francisco? Is it kind of like, it's not Oakland, right? It would be like...
No, it's not Oakland. It's like a small commuter town that's like 45 minutes outside of San Jose.
Got it.
Type of thing.
Got it.
But San Jose is a much larger city than
like Los Gatos kind of thing, or no?
Further, smaller, further and smaller. The little town I was from, the thing that it was known for was having the most number of fast food restaurants at the exit. And that's like the place that everybody stopped. I didn't eat fast food, but that's if you told people I'm from Clemens, they'd say, "Oh, this is the place with all the fast food restaurants."
Really?
Yeah,
that's funny. And why didn't you eat fast food? You just didn't like it?
I didn't like it. No.
Interesting. I also didn't eat fast food growing up, but all my friends thought I was weird for it.
Fascinating. You have fast food and vegetables, the two things that you don't like.
Yeah. For some reason, the whole McDonald's situation didn't appease me, but I liked pasta though, on the other hand. Yeah. Tons of pasta. So you grew up there. Tell me more. So how was growing up there? You're nerdy, not nerdy?
So grew up, as I said, rural North Carolina. Nerdy kid. I ended up reading a lot. Like a lot of my thinking on the world, I think, was shaped by some early science fiction. So I got my hands on Heinlein when I think, I was probably too young to start reading the books. And that then kind of allowed me to live in this fantasy land.
Were you online a lot or no? You were kind of...
Not at first. We didn't have a computer that was connected to the internet for a long time. But then when I was about 14, I convinced my dad to get a computer and get a high-speed internet connection. And then after that, I was very much online. So spent a lot of time on the depths of the web. I played a lot of Diablo 2 as well.
Oh, wow.
So maybe that's dating me a little bit, but I used to love that game.
And then you mentioned you had a different upbringing. Your dad was in music, and how did that shape how did it impact it?
It was interesting. My dad was a symphony conductor, and being a symphony conductor, you have such a strange kind of outlook on work. He worked a lot, but he didn't think that he worked a lot. So he would, think that he worked, call it 6 hours a week. He does some rehearsals, he does a performance, and that's his work. But then you look at him, and he's listening to music all the time. He's talking to musicians all the time. He's reading scores all the time because that's what he likes to do. It was funny when I graduated college and got my first job, I was working, 80, 90, 100 hours a week. And he would say, well, why do you work as much? And the conversation I had with him was, well, you work just as much. You just do it in a different format. I happen to like this and you like that. So, we each have our own styles.
And when you were in high school, were you did you study a lot? Was that kind of like your style, or no? It was kind of felt easy. You just got A's on the scores or on the test. And
that's a good question. I definitely remember studying, but I think I really liked a lot of the subjects that I was in. So some of it, I was studying for the test, and some of it was just trying to learn things because I was interested in it. So I really liked math. I really liked the sciences. I really love physics, and so that was just the stuff that I liked to do was read about it.
I'm not sure if you remember it, but do you think back then you were I wanted to be successful, make money, work really hard? Was it that ambition already present there, or you're I'm just interested in physics and math and I just want to study it, and that kind of came later?
It's a good question. I mean, I think the thing when reflecting on being a kid that I remember the most is feeling bored or isolated a lot. So as I said, we lived in a small town, kind of middle of nowhere. The neighborhood that we lived in was basically all older people, no other kids. I had a little brother, but he was 7 years younger than me. So, we weren't that close because, when I was 10, he was
7
3.
years is a long,
it's a big gap.
Yeah.
We're really close now. It just took, it took him growing up for us to get close. And so I felt, isolated, alone a lot. And I think a lot of that feeling drove me to say, I want to create an environment in which I can really push myself, in which I can do things, I can get connected to the world. And so I think some of the drive just came from that.
From kind of the isolation. But then you applied to a school that was also very isolated.
I went to Duke, yeah.
Yeah.
Isolated in one sense, I guess you could say. But Duke was an awesome experience. I felt super lucky to have gotten in, and lucky uh, to have had the experience that I had there.
Was it kind of like your top choice when you applied or no?
It was amongst the set. We had some family stuff that I needed to end up being near home for. So Duke was 2 hours from home, so I was able to drive there really easily. So selected that one, went there. Was really happy to have been there, but my experience was totally atypical. So I studied chemistry, biology, physics. I spent my time in a physics lab. I ended up running the student union, and it was like all of these like kind of extracurricular, like the research is what I really loved there. The classes were really interesting as well, but it felt like a fairly unique experience on college.
Was again like in high school you said it was the isolate. When it got to college, like did it change kind of the ambition? Did you feel it shaping a little bit differently or no?
It was interesting. I got to college and I'd taken a bunch of AP classes before in high school. So I skipped kind of like first year math, and I jumped immediately into second year math. And the first score I got back from a math test was like a 60. And I'd never gotten a 60 in my life. It turns out 60 was actually like the top quartile of the class. There was just a really hard grade. I found out much later. But getting the 60 on a test like scared the crap out of me. So I was like, oh wow, I'm in college. I need to really work hard. That's a thing. And so I think I started to figure out kind of how to work, how to study, how to learn my first year in college. And um, one of the things I found is, I had a fairly high ability to work hard, and there were great returns from working hard. And so I ended up taking, as I said, a lot of classes in a lot of different sciences, and pushing myself fairly hard academically, and I liked it because I could see that if I put in the effort, then that would come the results.
And like just kind of like transporting back then, but like when you're like saying, hey, I had a easy time working really hard. Was it like what was going through your mind? Is like, hey, I need to work hard to have a good outcome in life, or is it like I just want to work hard because I want to do well in this test? Like, what kind of like drove it? You think, or just I just like doing it because it's better than everything else I could be doing.
So I like solving problems. I like riddles. I like challenges. And I think for me, the hard work was much more about kind of if I put in the effort, then I can get to a good result. If I'm faced with a big challenge, then I can get to a great outcome. And so it was almost the outcome itself that drove me, or the challenge itself that drove me.
Got it. So it wasn't like you were, I don't know, studying because you wanted to get the best grades, to get the best internship, to get the best, kind of like something in that realm. It was more like the class itself was like interesting to you kind of thing.
No. My path was every summer in school. I did research in a research lab. I was working in a laser lab for 3 summers in a row. I had a scholarship that encouraged me to do that, so that made sense. And then when I graduated, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I'd thought about trying to go into medicine and didn't want to do that. I'd thought about trying to get a science like
Research in lasers specifically.
yeah, exactly. It's like I spent a lot of time programming laser system controllers. We were trying to do kind of optical imaging, which was super fun. But anyway, so I did research every summer. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I graduated. I knew I wanted to do something where I could work really hard and have good results from that, but I had no idea what it was. And the concept of tech entrepreneurship was totally foreign to do. So you went to Stanford, like tech entrepreneurship is like
It was almost like actually it was kind of low status at Stanford to do tech entrepreneurship because there's like so many people. It's like, oh my God, I have a startup, like it's like, okay, yet one more guy that has a startup, like
Well, when I graduated, there was one person that went to work at a startup, and I happen to know this guy, and that was like the only concept, and it was amazing because he'd had an internship at Goldman, he had a return offer from Goldman, and then he decided to go work at a startup instead. And like everybody at Duke was like, "What are you doing? Like, you're going the wrong track. Like, this doesn't make any sense." So the concept of working in startups, like, no one even thought about it. And eventually this friend, I kept talking to him. Like he went to New York. I ended up in Atlanta after graduating. But I would go visit him and like learn about what he was working on. I like talked to a bunch of people at the company. I actually worked at a company called Hunch, which if you remember was founded by Chris Dixon. So one day Chris Dixon was like nice enough to take some time and like talk to me about what tech entrepreneurship looked like. And I was like,
this is in college or
just after graduating, like 22 maybe. So the realization that building a company was even an option to me, it didn't come until I was probably 22.
Well, why not academia? I guess like what was you did 3 summers in a research lab?
Oh, I tried to.
Oh, you tried to?
I was planning to go into academia, but one of my really good friends in my senior year came to me and said, "Look, Zach, you can get a PhD anytime you want to, but if you have any interest in business at all, you should go work in the business world for a year or two, then come back and get a PhD." And
you majored in what? In physics?
I majored in chemistry and biology, and then I did a lot of work in physics too.
Got it.
And
so you like seriously consider it?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Anyway, my friend Jason, who actually now works at Plaid, he convinced me to go work at Bain, or to entertain working at Bain. So I went and worked in consulting for 13 months.
And why consulting?
That's a good question. As I said, I didn't exactly have a career plan. I had this thought in the back of my mind as a kid that I might want to try to be an astronaut, and I pursued that for a long time. Like I thought I was going to go to the Naval Academy and become a pilot. But then they canceled the shuttle program, and then I thought I might go be a doctor, but I realized, if I didn't happen to get selected to the space program, I didn't really want to be a doctor. That wouldn't be the best thing for me. And then that was like halfway through college when I was like, oh my gosh, I might actually not be an astronaut. What should I do with the rest of my life? And so I didn't exactly have a plan when I graduated.
So my story of this is I had this teacher called Chuck. That was this like computer hacker and programmer that like saved the world through code. He went to Stanford. That's why I wanted to go to Stanford, because I saw this guy on like the show do it, and he married this like beautiful blonde, and I was like, I want to be like that guy, like that was like, so he was like fictional quote unquote, but I was like, oh, that's like, good inspiration. So sometimes this stuff like really, I swear to God, I went to Stanford because of Chuck. Like it was like 100% like my.
This is a TV show?
Yeah, it's a TV show. It was like an NBC TV show.
Oh wow.
Yeah, or ABC. I don't know, one of the C's.
I'll look it up. That's so funny.
Yeah. So yeah, no one for now. So you're like in consulting because it was kind of.
It was an interesting place to go. I could learn some things. I thought I could. I was really inspired by the other people that were there. The people from my school that had gone to Bain that year were super impressive. I got there, and the first 2 months were incredible for me because you're just training. You're just learning things. You learn how to build financial models. You learn how to analyze businesses. You learn how to kind of do expert calls and things like that. And it was just awesome learning. It was like kind of this fun application of how to navigate the business world.
What didn't you like about the work?
The job was to do analysis that someone else decides, and then you don't necessarily have a lot of follow up on the
work
action.
or didn't.
Yeah, and you're not building anything. I'm building slides and I'm giving recommendations to people, but I'm 22. I'm totally unqualified to give people recommendations. So it wasn't my place. But the best part about Bain was first the training, and then second is that I got to meet my co-founder William, who he joined Bain right after me, maybe a year after me.
It was college in Atlanta, right?
He went to college at Emory. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In Atlanta. And it was funny because I was the Excel teacher, because in my first year I'd gotten really good at Excel. And then William joined maybe 6-8 months into me being there, and I had to teach him Excel. And like that was the only technical thing I've ever taught William. So William was my co-founder for Plaid.
Good to know. Good to know. I will make a comment to him about that.
There we go. Yeah, and when he has bad Excel skills, you can blame me.
Makes sense. So if the model is predicting way more profit than it was supposed to, you can blame Zach.
You can blame me. That's
Got it. Okay. So you guys met there just like being in the same class for Bain?
Exactly. So he was actually one class below me, and so I was his as I said, his trainer to teach him Excel. And I remember when he was starting, they did this dinner the night before all the new people started, and we were seated around this table, and I randomly got seated next to him. And I remember at the time I was like, I had this friend who was in New York who had started working at the startup, and so I'd gone to visit him a couple times in my first couple months. And just started to understand like, oh, there's a startup scene in New York. That's a career path. People can do that. That's an interesting thing. Then I met William. I was seated beside him at this dinner. And I think within 10 minutes of us being seated at this dinner, we just like only started talking to each other. We like started ignoring everyone else because like he knew about startups. And he'd grown up in California. He'd been exposed to some startups early. He had a bunch of friends that had worked in startups. And he was, thinking long term that he was going to go be an engineer or product leader at a startup. And so we had this great conversation and became really fast friends. We got into rock climbing together.
When you guys met, did you think, oh, like this guy's going to be one of my closest friends? Like, was it kind of immediate to you or no?
I don't think I actively thought that, but it was pretty obvious that we were going to be really good friends for a while. Um, so yeah, so anyway, became good friends really quickly, and then we were just always talking about startups, and it was.
And which year is this?
Oh my gosh, 2011.
And like, what was hot in Startup Plan at the time? Like, what was going on in TechCrunch that you guys were reading or talking about?
That's a good question. So Foursquare was big, which, by the way, I think Foursquare can come back now. I have this whole theory on Foursquare.
Oh, I definitely want to hear about it later. I remember I was checking on Foursquare a lot.
Yeah,
yeah. I was like, and then like connecting it to my Facebook and like so I could show people where I was.
Exactly. Yeah. So Foursquare was a big thing, and that was an East Coast company, which was important. I mean, I think there was a lot of stuff going on the West Coast, but yeah, Foursquare was definitely the one that
because it wasn't the East Coast, it was a little bit like closer to you and like more
exactly
interesting. So like Foursquare at this point was like, okay, like if one day we're like Foursquare, you're like, we're winning.
Exactly. I mean, Twitter was a big thing. Yeah, it's like
Twitter just starting to become big, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so you guys you met, started talking about startups. Foursquare was a hit, and then how did that evolve? You went rock climbing together. Is that kind of the bonding activity?
So William was a good rock climber. I was like a new rock climber, but we went rock climbing a bunch together and became good friends. I think probably the bonding experience for us was maybe the second or third time we went rock climbing. He handed me this new type of belay device that I'd never used before. He was like, just let go if it gets hard. And what I'm used to is you crank down on the rope if you need to like stop them from falling. But in this one, you let them go. So naturally, when he was coming down once from one of the climbs, I cranked down on the device and it dropped him from 20 feet. And he bounced up. He was like, "Don't worry about it. It's okay. But maybe don't ever use that device again." And after that, he forgave me for that. So that was clear that we were going to become friends for a long time.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And then did he like drop you on purpose after as well?
No, but he fake dropped me a few times. He was actually good at this. So he dropped me like about 30 feet down the wall, but then he stopped me before I hit the ground.
Oh my God. Oh wow. 30 feet?
I don't know, 20 feet.
Oh wow. Like that's scary.
Yeah.
I would have a hard time with that. Was it that you're like, okay, let's quit our job and like do something together kind of thing?
So it kind of, both of us went on this this kind of interesting journey through Bain. I, after basically a year, it was 13 months almost to the day, decided that I like wanted to leave. I was basically waiting for my first bonus. My first bonus, by the way, I was super proud. I'd gotten like the highest rating you could possibly get. And my first bonus was $4,000. And after that, I was like, all right, well, there's no economic reason for me to stay here. If I do a really good job, then I'm going to get a $4,000 bonus.
Yeah, maybe 6,000 next year.
Maybe 6,000 next year. Exactly. I mean, like they had such a strict progression path that the best person gets promoted maybe 2 months faster than the worst person, and so it just didn't make any sense.
Up or out, right? They call it this.
Exactly, but you can't go up that fast.
Yeah.
And so ended up leaving. I knew that there were a bunch of startups in New York, and that was the place that I wanted to go. Going to California, I'd been to San Francisco.
But then where's Will in this whole situation?
So Will ended up leaving a little bit before then. He was like thinking about like interviewing for startups and trying to figure out where he wanted to go. I think he had an offer from Google and maybe some other places. And we both ended up moving to New York around the same time. So I moved there, and the other reason I wanted to go to New York was that my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, lived there. We'd been dating for like 2 months. So I moved to New York, and we basically moved in together after like a month, me and my girlfriend, which that's about it. It turns out $4,000 from my bonus. That was all the money I had. It doesn't go very far in New York. And so I couldn't really pay rent. So she was like, just move in with me. And William moved in on one of his friend's couch. And he was like interviewing for some things, and I was like working at Techstars sort of, but then at the nights we would like get together and talk about things. We started building these side projects. And I think he was the one that came up with the idea of we should work on financial data, because it was in this really interesting period in New York. It was during the end of the Occupy Wall Street protests. So if you remember, kind of after the 2008 financial crisis, there were all these protests where people moved into Zuccotti Park in Wall Street, and it was a very disorganized set of protests. But one of the major messages was the American consumer doesn't feel like the banks are protecting them. The banks are acting in their best interest. They feel like the banks are profiting off of kind of what they should be. They're profiting instead of helping consumers.
Yeah.
And so we had this like little tiny office space that Techstars were working in.
So before that, what did you think about this whole Occupy Wall Street movement at the time?
I don't think I really engaged with it that much. I think kind of following 2008 financial crisis, I didn't quite know what to think. I was definitely in the camp of consumers need some better financial products. But I don't think I engaged with the politics of Occupy Wall Street.
Makes sense. It wasn't something that was like, oh my God, this like bothers me on a personal level or.
Well, not at first. So what happened was we had this, like I was working out of the Techstars office, and then at night William would come over and we'd like work on our projects. And then when Techstars ended, they run these like kind of programs. Yeah, it's basically a batch where a bunch of companies come and work out of the office, and then 6 or 8 weeks later they all leave. And so the person that ran it, this guy David Tisch and his partner Adam Rothenberg, they gave me office space. They were like, hey, you can just work out of this office for free for some amount of time. So William would come work there with me. And that was right off of Union Square. And basically what happened is all of the protesters got kicked out of Zuccotti Park, and they all moved up to Union Square. And so like every day that we'd go to the office, we'd walk through these protests. And like if you had the window open during the summer because it was hot, you'd hear these protests. And that then for me, like actually created a bunch of thinking of, consumers are not getting served by the financial system. Consumers are really frustrated. They want a better product. And then kind of that led to this whole line of thinking of, how does financial services work in the United States? Right, like at the time in 2012, if you wanted to get any new financial product, you had to walk into a bank branch and talk to a banker. And we were living in New York City at the time. There's a bank branch on every corner. That's totally fine. You can get any product that you want. There's no friction. But then I was remembering back, I grew up in small town North Carolina, like kind of middle of nowhere. There weren't very many banks in our town. Actually, I think there was only one bank in our town. And my parents were lucky they had a checking and savings account from that bank. But to get a mortgage, they had to go into the big city, which was 45 minutes away. And my parents were lucky because, they had a car, they had the time to go into the big city. But people in our community didn't have that kind of access. And even the rate my parents got by driving into the big city, they got a really terrible mortgage rate. And for me, a lot of this came together to realize, financial services might be broadly available to people, but it's very poorly distributed. And people that live in big cities and have a lot of money have access to a lot of things, but people that don't do that don't have that much access. And so this concept of how do we make financial services something that is available to everyone, it's something that everyone has access to, that they have competition in the market so that consumers can get the best rates. That concept of helping consumers have a better financial life became really important to me.
And how much and at this point, did you decide like we're going to start a startup and we're looking for an idea, or is it like still not clear at this point?
So it was this interesting transition where William and I were sort of working on side projects together, but both kind of interviewing for jobs elsewhere. So like he was like talking to some companies. I remember I was I was interviewing with some startups, and then I got some VC fund interviews. I got rejected by all the VC funds, which is the best thing that ever happened to me. Yeah. In retrospect. And eventually we realized we were working more on the company, less on the interviews. And then we just stopped doing interviews altogether. So we kind of had this like transitionary phase together as friends where we went from sort of doing a company to like fully doing a company. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it was super fun because, we were having a blast working together on these ideas. And the concept of getting.
So what were some of the other ideas that you were kind of like thinking about at the time?
Oh man, so the first versions of Plaid were not at all what Plaid is now. So we were trying to build first a restaurant recommendations application. So we had this idea that we'd work on financial data. We'd take all your financial data, we'd look at it, and then we'd recommend restaurants that you might like because we could see all the restaurants that you went to. Because remember, Foursquare was popular at the time. That was cool. And recommendation algorithms were like really interesting.
Like Yelp was still like a big thing.
Yelp was a big thing. Yeah. So we built a really great restaurant recommender. Turns out the trait of me saying, hey, please give me all of your financial data, and in exchange, I'll recommend restaurants to you. You would say that trade doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's a little bit aggressive.
Exactly. Second idea we had was, how do we build a personal financial management tool? There were the consumers outside our window that were saying, hey, I don't feel like I have good...
Like mint.com kind of
Exactly.
thing?
So Mint wasn't really mobile at the time. And we were like, let's build Mint for mobile. And so we started working on that. It turns out if you tell a consumer to spend less money, consumer pretty quickly deletes your app. They don't want to hear that they need to spend less money over and over again.
Like,
So,
what do you think, like, you know, and I ask this question all the time now, which is like, right now, I think if I was to think of an idea, I probably would have better ideas that I had, you know, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, I guess I always think like, what changed? You know, like, what are the things that you learned to like make you just like more have better ideas, I guess? You know, like, what were the things that like today, I guess, would have tell you that those were not great ideas, but so you wouldn't execute today, but at the time you didn't know, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I think it's interesting because as you go through the business world, and frankly, as you just spend more time in the world in general, you start to realize a lot of things. You realize how consumers act in the business world. You realize how to do research. You realize like how to build financial models and projections, and you gain contacts that you can bounce ideas off of, and like you become like much better at business objectively. But when you're 23, you kind of work with what you have. You know, people always say you should build something that you're interested in. And we were like, oh, we're interested in data. Like, what can we build with data?
Yeah.
And so, you know, eventually when we landed on the long-term idea for Plaid, I think if we'd done the market analysis, we probably wouldn't have built the company. And I think you hear that story a lot. I don't know.
For Brex was definitely the case. Yeah, 100%.
But because you didn't know, you kind of follow it, and then it turns out being a better idea.
I kind of find that, like, you know, at least for what I felt in the beginning is like, you're just fighting not to die. You know what I mean? Like, so like anything that gets like some level of traction, you know, maybe you can figure out adjacencies later, but you're just like, I just want some level of product market fit, you know? That's like the hardest part.
Totally. But anyway, so we built 6 consumer financial products. 6 of them, yeah. So as I said, started with restaurant recommendations, then mobile mint. Then we built like a place that figured out places that were cheaper for you to spend at. We built a thing that connected your credit card to Foursquare. So every time you swipe your credit card, it automatically checked you in on Foursquare because again, Foursquare was cool.
Yeah, that's cool actually.
Yeah,
people didn't like that.
It was great. No, people actually really did like that one. We just couldn't figure out how to make that into a business. Like no one was
that makes
pay us
sense.
for it.
Yeah. Checks out.
And then we built a couple others. And
how long was this whole process of going through?
Probably 9 months of building.
Okay, so it's very fast iteration.
Fast iteration, yeah. So probably 9 months of building consumer products that, you know, never really went anywhere. And along the way, we'd been building this kind of like integration to get the data from the banks. And we had a bunch of friends that came to us and said, hey, you know, Zach and William, like, your ideas are okay. But the backend that you built is actually kind of interesting. Can I license that? We actually had a friend who ran engineering at Venmo come to us and say, hey, can I license that? You should probably stop building consumer apps, but can I license that backend and we'll pay you for it? And, you know, pretty quickly we ran out, like we were really out of money. As I said, we started with basically no money. Techstars paid me almost nothing. And so like we were just like eating ramen and living on couches basically.
Yeah.
And so eventually when Venmo said like, hey, we'll pay you for that, all of a sudden for us, we said, maybe we should like go get paid for something. So again, with your idea of...
so this is Venmo pre-acquisition, pre-everything?
No, it was actually Venmo had been acquired by Braintree and then acquired by eBay at the time. But the founders and the early team were still really driving all the product strategy. And so the head of engineering came to us and said, hey, like we'd like to license.
So it's part of eBay?
It was part of eBay, yes. Because PayPal...
Because the Braintree acquisition wasn't until a little bit later. Wasn't it like 2014 or something? I don't remember exactly, but I remember... Or no?
I remember when we got our first contract with them, it was signed on PayPal letterhead.
Okay.
So...
Which year was that?
That was in 2014.
2014.
So I don't know exactly when
Makes
what
sense.
happened.
Because I remember, so my first business was a payment processing. So I remember I was like, saw this like Braintree acquisition for 800 million. I was like, oh yeah, like that sounds great.
There you go.
So that's why I was kind of remember tracking this at the time. So Venmo came to you and said, hey, we want to connect with bank accounts.
Yep.
Let's do that. And you're like, I want to get paid for something. I'm tired of these consumer apps that make no money.
Yeah. That's exactly it. So we said, all right, great, Venmo, like let's go hard. We'll put together a contract. We'll figure out how you can license it.
And then a part of you was like, oh, I kind of still want to do consumer because it's like cooler kind of thing, or no?
No. I don't think we ever had desire to build consumer for consumer's sake. And we certainly didn't have a desire to be cool. You could not describe me or William as cool. But we wanted to build a business that had meaningful value to people. And what we realized is if we could create a platform, like the vision became basically like, let's build an API for your bank account. But if we can create a platform upon which, 10 or 100, maybe even fintech companies can exist. Now we have like 10,000 fintech companies on our platform. If we could build a platform that helped a bunch of other fintech companies build great products for consumers, then we could have much more impact on consumers than any one app that we would build. It was also pretty clear that we were bad at consumer, just based on the level of traction we've gotten in the past. And so this idea of building a platform, which we spent 90% of our time on the back end, we had a lot of fun on the back end. That kind of stuff was good for us. So that kind of all came together in like it being pretty obvious that we should make this.
And you hadn't raised money when you got your Venmo contract.
We had raised $60,000.
You had raised $60,000 from where? How did that happen?
Well, so on back of our consumer products, we'd put together like a round. We were raising $500,000 on a $3.5 million valuation because that was what valuations were at the time. Yeah. And we'd kind of push forward with these consumer products, and people had believed that some of our consumer products might take off. And then we got to like the time that we were going to close. It was a convertible note. There was like a lead investor that was doing $250,000, and another investor was doing $100,000, and the rest was a bunch of small checks. And like the day we were supposed to close, the lead investor called and said, "Hey, look, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm out."
Oh, wow.
So pulled out of this round. I still remember who that is. I don't hold grudges, but I have a long.
But a little bit. But look, I think he probably looks back and is sadder than you are.
So anyway, he pulls out. All the other investors pull out, and one by one, because we didn't feel good about not telling the investors the lead investor is pulling out. So we called the investors one by one. We said, "Hey, look, the lead investor's out, but we'd still love to close the round with you." And every single other investor said, "If the lead investor's out, then I'm out." Except we had three people that said, "Okay, great, we'll go with it." And we didn't tell them that they were the only three, but we were transparent in saying that the lead investor wasn't there, but we didn't tell them that they were the only. So
those are probably really happy people.
Yeah, it's funny. There were two $25,000 checks and one $10,000 check.
But how are you meeting all these people at this point? Through Techstars?
New York startup community, Techstars, yeah. Like,
so you were going to like meetups? Is that what kind of the scene was about at that time, or no?
A lot of meetups. That was fun. And you meet a person, you tell them what you're doing, you ask them for advice. I'm a big believer in just the cold email to someone that can help you with something. So I send a lot of cold emails. I made a rule for myself that I wanted to send one every single week for the first part of the company. Now I have a rule that I send one every month. It's just an email to someone that says, "Hey, I'm really impressed by this thing that you've done. Would you be willing to give me some advice on this?" Not even a meetup now. It's just, "Hey, would you be willing to talk to me for 5 minutes on the phone?" And usually people say, "Oh, no, come over to my office. Let's have a chat." And so it was through that. It's just hustle.
Did you like fundraising at this time or no?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't like that we were failing.
Well, getting no's sucks for everyone, but
it was good to tell our story. It was fun. It's like an interesting process. But the thing I didn't tell you, so we called everybody. Everybody fell out of the round except for these three investors: $25,000 check, $25,000 check, and a $10,000 check. And the funny coincidence is that they were all named Justin. So we used to joke that we had $60,000 from the Justins, and we'd make this joke between each other of like, "Hey, you're gonna do that thing. Is that a good decision? Like, what would the Justins think about if they do?"
Is that like you're bored? The Justins board.
Exactly. So it's the Justins behind the scenes. They're the ones that we have to impress. We have to pay their money back somehow. Yeah. And like, I don't even think these folks even now know. Maybe they'll listen to this podcast and learn that it was the three Justins. But like, they were the reasons that we stayed alive. And like, of course, they've had this phenomenal return. We dropped the valuation for them. I think we gave them 2.5 instead of 3.5. Yeah. So they had some phenomenal return on.
They're very happy, I'm sure.
Yeah. So the Justins, that was the people we had to impress at first.
Wow. How much do you think the Justin stake would be worth? Like in 2021. I know you're gonna push it in 2024, but.
Oh man, I don't know, like tens of millions, certainly.
That's amazing. Well, that's a good call out to not pull out of the rounds, just because the lead investor. Have your own conviction,
There we go.
So they gave you $60,000 and then that was kind of in parallel. Well, no, this is before the Venmo thing because you're still doing the consumer stuff. And then you did the Venmo thing, and then was raising money after easier?
Yeah, so we made the pivot to building the backend platform. That was kind of late 2013, early 2014. So basically, from mid 2012 up until mid 2013, we've been working on these consumer apps. So 9, 12 months of that. And then we sort of said, all right, well, if we want to kind of do the backend pivot, then it's going to take us a while to retool. So kind of end of 2013, we finally had the platform ready. And so we built this backend platform that worked really well. But then we didn't have any customers. So
It sounds easy to start, hard to scale.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we had this product, but no one was using it. And so we went to the TechCrunch Disrupt Hackathon. I can't remember if this was in 2013 or 2014, but we went to the TechCrunch Disrupt Hackathon, and we decided we were going to build a demo app, another consumer app, sitting on top of our backend API. And we went.
You know, this TechCrunch Disrupt, you said, right?
TechCrunch Disrupt.
You know, this is my dream to go to TechCrunch Disrupt. I was in Brazil. I saw it on TechCrunch. You know, I was like, and like this event, and people were like pitching, and I remember there's like startup battles, and I was like, all right, one day I'm gonna go to TechCrunch Disrupt.
This was peak New York City tech. It was so fun in New York City.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So
awesome.
Anyway, so we went to TechCrunch Disrupt Hackathon. It was me, it was William, and we had this intern who we'd convinced to come join us. He'd gone to Duke with a friend of mine. He came and joined us for like a summer. So it was the three of us that went to this TechCrunch Disrupt Hackathon, and William and the intern, Michael, who ended up becoming an amazing Plaid employee, like manager, great leader. But William and Michael worked on the back end of this product. I built the front end of this product. And then when I had extra time, I would walk around and talk to every single person in this room to say, hey, we built an API that lets you get financial data. Do you want to build something on top of it? And so I was basically just doing sales because I needed to sell to developers. All the developers were at one place. So I was just like running around trying to talk to everybody. And the product we built was this. It was a magnifying glass of your life. So everywhere that you spent, it had a map. And then it had a magnifying glass that like scrolled around the map and magnified every place that you spent, and it just had a timeline. So you could kind of like track, oh, I went on a trip to New Orleans. All right, where are all the places that I spent in New Orleans? And it would like pop up photos. It ended up becoming
pretty cool.
It was a cool app.
I would use that.
Yeah. We built it in 24 hours on top of the Plaid API. And then we went and presented it, and it won. It won TechCrunch Disrupt Hackathon. And so that got us like a bunch of press.
Oh, wow. You were TechCrunch Disrupt winner.
Yeah. Well, we didn't think we weren't trying to win. We were actually just going to talk to all the developers. Yeah. It turns out we won. And I remember that was like the first time that anybody actually thought we might do something impressive. So we won it.
Was your own confidence kind of like way higher at this point?
Way higher. I mean, we won the hackathon, and like an hour later, Roloff both that emailed me and was like, hey, do you want to meet?
And you already knew who he was, like.
Oh yeah. Of course.
Producer, the Sequoia partner, Roloff. Yeah.
He runs Sequoia.
Yeah. It's true. He runs Sequoia now.
So he emailed me or us. I can't remember if it was both of us. And then William and I got to go meet him, like basically right after that, like during the event. And we kind of gave him this high level pitch on what we were doing. He was like, interesting. Like you should maybe call us later. And then a bunch of other investors like started talking about what we were doing, and so
and they were talking about the back end, not the magnifying glass.
Yeah. Not. I mean, we had probably 10 or 20,000 consumer signups on the magnifying glass thing, but it was not built to scale. I remember we left the hackathon, and we all tried to go to dinner. It was like me and William and Michael, and then my girlfriend and William's friend Amit, who was the guy that his couch that he was staying on. And we were all at dinner, and we had all these signups going to the app, and the app kept crashing. So like the three of us like had to go sit outside the restaurant on like a park bench, like working on things to try to fix things. Me and my girlfriend just had dinner.
And at this point, like, what do you think? You know, this is like it seems that it was when we're starting to see that it could work, right? What do you think up to this point was kind of like the hard work piece that was like, you guys just hustling it out? What was like right place, right time? You know what I mean? Because, there's the why now of every business, and which is almost, it's like some mix of luck and smart, right? Because you can see it. And how much was it just like luck? You didn't really know how it was going to turn out. And like, how would you, think about pieces of the story that fit into each of these?
That's a good question. So, when we started the business, I don't think our timing was necessarily great. There had been some people that had tried to build kind of similar-ish businesses before. So that was actually a pretty negative signal for everyone else that was thinking of investing in the company. This company, Yodely, has been working on it for 10, 15 years, and the market cap is not that high. And so that was like a hard one for us when investors looked at it. But again, we were following demand. We listened to what the developers in the community said. We listened to the people that came inbound. We went and talked to fintech developers, and we said, hey, like let's figure out what works here. The things that worked really well for us first was building an API platform and selling to developers. Like that was not a common thing in 2013.
And at this point, like looking at the story of Plaid, but like, what do you think you missed that worked out? You know what I mean? Was it like the size of the fintech market and how much it would, how big it would be?
Yeah. So the size of the fintech market is much larger than we thought it would be at the time. And actually, we were too early. We were kind of lucky to survive through our seed round and into our Series A. But between our Series A and our Series B, Plaid went from being like a good business to being a really great business because the fintech market just took off. Yeah. So early on, we started working with a couple of interesting companies. So we worked with Venmo, but Venmo was kind of the only game in town for a long time. We worked with Robinhood, but like it took a little while for like Robinhood to actually launch their product. Actually, it took a long while for them to launch their product. They built a bunch of stuff before they launched it, and they did, of course, great. And we started working with Coinbase, but this concept of a cryptocurrency exchange, like, is that going to actually go anywhere?
Did you believe crypto at the time or not?
I mean, one of my friends from college worked at Coinbase, and he was in my ear about it. So I was like, fine, like maybe it'll go somewhere. Like I guess we should spend the time on selling to them. Yeah. But if he hadn't convinced me, like I definitely wouldn't have done it.
Wow.
And so no, we were too early because like nothing in fintech was really working. And then call it 2016, 2017, fintech just like lit the world on fire. We saw a ton of the trading applications do super well. We saw all the peer-to-peer stuff go really well. We saw Cash App come out. Brex obviously launched and scaled. And that was a huge inflection point for our business.
And did you actually believe the market was going to be really big, or it was kind of like you had to, say it because you're fundraising, but like you didn't know? Like, were you actually seeing early signs, or it's kind of like, look, we kind of need this for survival kind of thing?
I think at first, when we first started doing the pitch, the obvious answer is like, no, the market will be huge.
Yeah.
But as we started to do the analysis, we realized that we believed the thing we were saying more than we originally thought. And I think a lot of that was because when you looked at financial services then, it was all built by the banks. If you want to build anything in financial services, you had to be a bank, basically. And then we saw this thing called Venmo. We saw this thing called Mint. We saw this thing called Robinhood. And you started to see that non-banks could build financial products. And just logically, it was so obvious that if non-banks can build financial products, a lot of them are going to be built. You can't have a totally siloed industry. And then our second belief, though we didn't know how much we believed it, was that if all the non-banks build really interesting things, then the banks are going to eventually build really interesting things too. And that didn't start happening until 2022, 23, 24. So it's taken that long for the banks really to start leaning into fintech. And even now, a lot of the banks are still pretty far behind. So that was basically our pitch: was non-banks are going to build financial services products, and then that'll force the banks to build financial services
But
products.
If I look at like a Plaid, when was your Series A? 2015?
Yes.
If I look at a Plaid Series A pitch, how would it like kind of look like back then?
So I think like a lot of the pitch was, hey, we're building this hard technical thing, and this thing hasn't really ever existed before, certainly not in the way that we're building it. And we believe that people are going to build on top of it. And I don't think that we had great proof points to say why people were going to build on top of it, but we were pretty convinced that they were going to.
And the hard technical thing was just, developer first, great APIs, reliable, was that, on top of these banks?
The hardest thing was building integrations to 12,000 banks.
Yeah.
And then making them not fall down when we got scale.
Yeah.
That was the hardest thing.
Makes sense. Do you think that's, like looking back today, you could have like survived that long without seeing the traction? You know what I mean? Like 4 years of like kind of grinding it out, which obviously was the right call, but imagine like just going through 4 years.
You mean if I were starting a new business?
Yeah.
I don't know. I want to believe that I could, because again, I like solving the problems. Like I like a customer having a problem and me having a solution to that problem. Yeah. And so like maybe I would be as intellectually interested by it, but I'm not sure that I would have the patience to work.
I think it was a grind, right? Like I can imagine. But then when it kind of like started growing, that's probably the best feeling in the world too, right? When you started seeing the.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Maybe that's when, we became profitable accidentally one year, like very profitable for a while. And it was just a fun time to see.
What was
it go up.
what was the thing that on the history that you were like, it was like one company that just blew up? Was there like something like that?
No, there were like, that was the thing. It was like 10 companies that all blew up in the same year.
And it was this Robinhood, Venmo, Coinbase, like these mints, like
Chime,
Chime.
yeah, like all of them. Like all in the same year got really big really fast.
Wow.
And it was great. And then, I mean, a lot of that perpetuated and continued. And so we've seen, our customers just continue to grow year on year, basically all throughout, with one blip in the second half of 22 when like all of fintech contracted, but getting back to growing after that.
And what do you think you got wrong, right? When you were looking through the pitch, in 2015, 16, 17, you were like projecting it out. Like, what are the things you think you got wrong? On the thesis, obviously execution wise, we all had a lot of fuck ups, but on the thesis.
I mean, I think most of the things that we got wrong were actually much more on the execution side. Like, I think our thesis proved to be more right than like even I would have believed. Execution, we messed up all sorts of things. Like we refused to hire execs at the company. We didn't understand what experience meant. And we didn't understand why we needed to hire experienced people.
Yeah.
We thought we just wanted young people that would go figure it out and work really hard. And that was a great idea up until you hit like 50 people. And then all of a sudden, like having someone that's done it before is really helpful.
It's really helpful, yeah.
So we made all sorts of execution mistakes.
And then like, how do you think about, like you said, you believe like, really young people, now you need execs. What are some of those other things that you had like beliefs early on that you kind of change your mind?
Yeah. So, I mean, we had all these like hiring philosophies. So one of them was we want to hire for slope and not y-intercept. So by that, we mean like we want to hire for the trajectory that someone will improve, and their experience level didn't matter all that much. We had another one called the experience trap, where if we hired people that were experienced and they started talking about their past experience, we would basically say, look, you can never reference your past company again. You can only talk about why that applies to this company. So definitely a bunch of like kind of heretical things that we were doing early on.
And do you still believe these or no?
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
We have a large number of very young people that we try to push into senior leadership positions.
And was there something that was like boomerang? I definitely felt stuff like this at Brex where like I used to believe something and then I kind of changed my mind. It's like, no, it turns out I was right from the beginning kind of thing.
Well, there's a certain bigger company thing that just pervades as you get there. So, as you get further along, everybody says you should require people to do weekly one-on-ones. You should require people to do performance reviews twice a year and things like that. And like most of those are actually pretty good. But there are many things that people say you really should do X that actually doing the opposite of X might be much better for you. We try to have the lightest weight possible performance review process. Like you got to give people feedback, yes, and you got to make sure they hear it, but like it shouldn't take very long. So we try to make it really simple. People talk a lot about the concept of micromanagement, like the CEO's job is to delegate and give people space. And I believe that that's true in 80% of cases. And in 20% of the cases, I believe my job is to micromanage the heck out of something. And so it is nice to look back at the things that worked early on, think about what's kind of melted out of the culture for one reason or another, and then say what do you want to put back in. So
one of the best advice I got early on was that the best kind of CEO to be is like an authentic one, because like it's gonna be really hard to emulate someone that's like doesn't really share your personality traits. Like you can, I remember thinking, looking at like, oh my god, like I had a hard time kind of like reading a lot. I have ADHD, and I was reading, I think like Bezos or Elon, like, or whoever like read, or Bill Gates, I think, had like a reading week, and he like read 20 books in a week. I'm like, fuck, I'm not that. You know what I mean? Like if that's what required to win, like I don't know what I'm gonna do. And I got this advice, and it was really helpful to me because like I was like, okay, like maybe there's a version of being the best CEO that I can be, right? Like of who I am, etc. And if you were to describe that for you, right? Like what are I would say, what makes you a unique CEO, I guess, or it doesn't have to be unique, being like only you, but like some of the traits for you as CEO that may not be true for other CEOs, or that you look at other successful people and it's like, yeah, they do that, but it's not really my thing. What are some of those, Zachisms?
That's a good question. So stylistically, I am a big reader, and we have a pretty strong written culture at Plaid, and I think that the two go hand in hand. Some companies are like meeting cultures, let's talk everything out. We're much more like think about it first, then write it, then we'll talk about it if we do talk about it still at the end of that. So that has been really helpful. I think for me, as I said, like even going back to college, like I figured out that I knew how to work really hard and focus really narrowly. And so I try very hard to stay narrowly focused, which means that there are like these big parts of the companies that I like basically abdicate.
Like what?
Early, well, I'll get there. Early on, like I had this realization that for the company to do well, if we got an A plus in like one thing or two things and got like a D minus, like as close as we could possibly get to failing, but not totally fail, and basically everything else, it would be fine. So like for a long time, like our accounting systems were a total mess. Like our HR systems were a total mess. Like pretty much everything that was like operational in the company was a total wreck, except for recruiting. We're really good at recruiting. But like once you got to the company, like you would look around and you'd be like, well, how do I file an expense report? You'd be like, I don't know, like talk to someone. We have no idea how to do that. And I mean, even early on, we said, you know, we don't need to figure out how to do sales generally. We need to figure out how to sell to like only this very narrow type of customer. We basically qualify customers as the ones that were willing to give us their phone number and let me text them for product feedback. And like, if you weren't willing to do that, like we actually just disqualified you from our sales funnel. And so we're just super narrowly focused on just this one thing. And so for me now, I try to still do that. So you know, I've been fortunate to hire really great execs. Like that's one of the things that I focus really narrowly on is recruiting great people, and then I just give them a lot of space, and that's tended to work out really well. There's a trust building period at first, but once the trust gets built, then it's like a lot of space, and I basically don't pay that much attention. And on the flip side, I go really deep on, you know, what's the number one thing for the company right now, and if I can help with that, then I'm really deep on it.
So you guys started the kind of like core bank connection product, quote unquote, right? How did it expand from there, I guess? Like how did you think even about expanding from there? Because that worked so well. So
Bank Connections for us, that was call it built in 2013, 2014. And we went from having, you know, first one bank that would have one data point to having 4 types of data that we would return and 12,000 banks. And so for probably like 6-7 years, it was literally just like get more banks on the system and like make sure that it scales. And so it was just heads down, only scale. In call it 2020 timeframe, we started a little bit in 2019 timeframe. We said, okay, like this bank connectivity thing is going to be really big. It's gonna work really well. We should take just a tiny like portion of our resources and go explore some new product areas. So we went and started exploring, and William did some of it. I did some of it. We kind of go chase down these ideas around, could you use a bank account to actually make a payment? Could you use a bank account to apply for a loan? Could you use a bank account to do risk and fraud analysis on top of it? And so we found that the answer was yes to all of these things. And in, call it 2020, we started investing like pretty heavily behind these 3 major new product areas, which is great in the long term, but terrible in the short term, because it turns out trying to do like 3 big new product areas, basically 3 new business units all at once, is like too much scattering of resources, like too expensive. You should do one after another. So another really good learning for us. But we ended up building out a consumer reporting agency, so basically a credit reporting agency within the company. We ended up acquiring an ID verification company called Cognito. We integrated that, and they've done super well. And then they've expanded us.
We were Cognito customers.
You were, yeah.
Yeah.
They expanded us into risk and fraud areas, which has been great. So a bunch of risk and fraud oriented products, and then kind of our payments and pay by bank team has started to really take off. Like a lot of consumers, if you ever bought a car online, chances are you paid with Plaid for that because they don't accept credit.
Yeah, I think
cards.
Tesla does. I remember connecting my Plaid accounts with Tesla.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I actually put a deposit in a Tesla that never got produced, and then had to get it back later. But
well, hopefully Plaid helped you on both sides of that, and I'm sorry that it didn't get there.
Yeah, no worries. I think they helped me on the way in, and the way out was purposely hard, I guess. But I don't think it was Plaid's fault.
That's funny.
I think that's more on the Tesla side. Makes sense. So they kind of evolved. not only now from the bank connects, but kind of fraud and risk and through Cognito, and then the bank payments, and well, now this just reminded me to make you tell the Visa story.
Oh yeah, so we sold the company, and then we're in the unique position of actually unselling a company. So in 2020, we signed the docs to be acquired by Visa. It was a transaction valued a little bit above $5 billion.
But like, what was the leading up to it? Like, what was
the rationale was complex, to say the least. First is we were expanding internationally. Visa was amazing internationally. They could have pulled us in a ton of different ways into international markets. Second is, it was a great valuation and a great outcome for the team. Third is, we were really struggling because a lot of the banks were trying to block us at the time.
How was your psyche and Will's psyche on this? Like, what was the...
So Will had left. Will left the company in, I think it was 2019.
That's right.
But he was still up on the board, still a part of the conversation. Deciding to sell the company is a really hard decision. I think for me, I was much more focused on the long-term outcome for the business. So yeah, really hard decision for me. I was, 51-49 on...
Do you think most people on the team and the board were 51-49 too, if you asked them?
Yeah, something like that. I mean, plus minus a little bit, but I think people were really conflicted with the sale. I think a lot of people were really happy, and a lot of people understood the logic. But I mean, there were a lot of people that wished that we'd stayed independent.
Which they got their wish. It's crazy, man. I can't even imagine what the process go through to like sell it. And so then how did he? You went through the whole kind of DOJ. I imagine that was probably not a fun period.
Well, so this was it was 2020. We signed the docs to sell the company in January 2020. And
it was like 5 billion something.
Yeah, 5.3 billion. So we move along. We're kind of like doing all the stuff. We're submitting the paperwork. You have to submit a bunch of paperwork to the regulators so the regulators can do an antitrust check. And we assumed that it would not get blocked. So we submit the paperwork, and then March hits. So COVID, and basically like the financial markets freeze. All the stock prices plummet. Like Visa's stock price plummets. And we're looking at our deal, and in the deal,
was it all cash or stock?
It was an all cash deal, or like predominantly cash deal. And there's a provision to say that Visa could not pull out even in the case of a pandemic. It was like one of those throwaway clauses that lawyers put into these docs, but it said Visa couldn't pull out. And so we were looking at it and we said, we're gonna get a great return on the sale, like especially if the entire market is trashed.
Yeah.
So we thought we were geniuses until March, April, May, and then the market started to turn, and our business started to turn too. Like our business grew incredibly quickly in the latter half of 2020 and into 2021. And so as we continued to progress through this, we had a 1-year exclusivity. The DOJ came back kind of after 3 months and said, hey, we want to take a deeper look into this because we think that basically Visa might be a monopolist, and this merger would constitute a furthering of their monopoly, or I don't know the exact words. And so we kind of went through this process. The investigation was ongoing, and we get towards kind of like October, November, and we know that in January the exclusivity lapses. We get towards October, November, and we're starting to have the internal conversation of, well, if this exclusivity lapses, maybe we should just walk away from this deal. Like maybe we shouldn't continue.
And like, how much was the company growing in that period of time? Was it like a lot?
It was growing like, I would say, high double digits.
Okay, wow.
As we got to the end of the transaction, we basically went to Visa and we're like, look, we didn't have a breakup fee, which was one of the biggest failures that we had in the deal. I like to say that, if I looked back and tried to devise a Hollywood script for what would accelerate the business the most, this would be the perfect script. I mean, I'm not creative enough to come up with a Hollywood script, but it was, sell the deal, sell the company, get a huge brand moment. Like the entire world heard about this transaction.
Yeah. 100%.
Have Visa, be on our side with banks for, a year, have, a massive acceleration in our business, like tons of growth in the second half of 2020, and then get the opportunity to kind of decouple from Visa, which is another brand moment that everybody heard about.
Yeah.
And then be on our way independently.
And do you think this all helped with the bank somehow, or was like kind of didn't matter? Like how did this impact all the bank stuff?
I think a few things changed. First is the administration changed. And the Biden administration and the CFPB under the Biden administration has been much more focused on ensuring consumers have access to financial data. The second shift was Plaid just got really big, and fintech got really big, especially during the pandemic, as everyone had to use fintech
Online,
because
yeah.
they didn't want to go to a bank. And so fintech became like really solidified. And so I think through the combination of those two, it kind of became an industry that's going to stick around for the long term. Also, a lot of the banks started to benefit from it. So they started to build products using fintech infrastructure, using Plaid. And that shift, I think kind of the period during COVID where the banks pulled in like a lot of their digital roadmap and accelerated it. That all helped to make it something that, we believe the industry is now going to exist for a very long time, even without the help of Visa.
Makes sense. So if you look at like that, it was a year between like signing and following through. What was the arc of like your happiness to sadness? You know what I mean? Like what was the, when was the highlights and lowlights of the whole experience?
That being in that period of time was like one of the most confusing that I've been in business, because we couldn't do all the things that we wanted to do without getting approval, but we also couldn't coordinate with Visa at all. So for example, if I wanted to hire an exec, Visa had to say yes to it, but I couldn't coordinate the recruiting of that exec with Visa. And so it was like really hard to hire execs into this world in which the transaction is going to close soon, but they were coming to independent Plaid. And we went through a period of hypergrowth. So we hired, we basically doubled the company in that period. So it was like this really confusing. And
there's a weird, you can't issue RSUs too, right? Like there's some weird stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something like we had to issue promises of future equity because we couldn't actually
issue equity. Yeah, because the share count is probably fixed or something.
Something like that. Yeah.
Interesting. Definitely like the Plaid and Figma transaction traumatized a generation of entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
That like run growth stage companies, because everyone thought that before there was like no risk of selling your company. You'll say you actually de-risking selling your company, but now there's like all this other risk. Like it's it's a real thing.
Well, if anyone's doing a big transaction and wants to talk about antitrust risk, feel free to call me.
Yeah, we'll do. And so, okay, so now we're in 2021. You kind of walk away from the deal. Back, everything is in kind of hyper growth, and then we get into 2022. So describe the experience, for you guys over the last couple of years. It's been tough on growth stage companies. We can all admit that, but.
It has been.
Yeah.
So in 2021, as I said, we raised a big up round, continued to grow. 2022 was good for us in a lot of senses, hard for us in a market sense. So what Plaid does is enable a lot of kind of digital-oriented finance companies, including investment firms, including cryptocurrency companies, and including online lenders. In the second half of 2022, those three segments got walloped as the interest rates went up. And so that was the first quarter where we saw our customers overall shrink. Actually, the business for the year did totally fine because we grew with a bunch of new customers as well. But Q3, Q4, we saw our existing customers shrink. Behind the scenes, though, the story was really good because we'd invested in these three new business lines, and they started to actually get towards real scale. They started to get towards the size that we could start to think of them as, call it Series B, then Series C, then maybe even Series D style startups that each in and of themselves were going to be long-term sustainable businesses for us. And then going this year, there's definitely a reset of kind of the fintech ecosystem throughout 2023. But 2024 has been one of such excitement. Like it feels like we're back in the kind of 2019 days.
For fintech?
Yeah, just like the level of excitement that I'm seeing from entrepreneurs, like the number of companies, like the number of startups that has signed up with Plaid in Q1 of this year versus Q1 of last year, it's up 65%.
Oh, wow.
So just like seeing these really positive growth stories these really positive proof points of what's going to happen in fintech, like makes me very excited. And then the biggest shift for us is we've actually seen the banks come to the market in a really big way. So all the banks are saying, we want to build now digital-oriented lending products, digital-oriented account opening, digital-oriented investing products for our customers. And I think that's long-term going to be.
And you can see already, I know like my JP Morgan account, I can connect other accounts, I think, inside the JP Morgan account. And before, they might have, might not at all be in the roadmap, right? Pre-Plaid.
Exactly. Yeah.
And what do you think? So the opportunity for fintech now, so like, it did feel to me that fintech had like a huge wave, maybe Stripe and Square probably started it out. well, PayPal obviously, but then it was 10 years of hiatus, and then Stripe and Square, probably the first ones, and as you said, Robinhood, Coinbase, Chime, then Brex came, and obviously you guys are powering everything, but now it seems like AI is taking over everything. But what do you think are the still opportunities? Like, because my mental model, it seems like I can't think of like a lot of good fintech ideas these days in the US, but internationally it seems like all this huge opportunity. But in the US, I'm missing still a few good ideas. So I'm curious, like, what do you think are some of the opportunities?
For me, a lot of the things that are the most interesting are much more in the large company, enterprise, like large merchant, and the bank space. So within the banks, we see them all, as I said, trying to build out digital lending, digital account opening, digital investing practices, and kind of scale those in a way that they can go compete with all the fintech companies. Within the merchants, we're seeing every merchant start to try to add in, can I issue a card? Can I create a wallet? How can I accelerate my consumer's checkout experience? And all the platforms are trying to help them. So be that
Shop Pay or Link.
Exactly.
Or...
So this concept of like merging fintech into commerce is really taking
the kind of like
right
embedded
now.
fintech, we'll call it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's been really, really big. And we've seen, again,
do you think that's opportunity for startups, or no? That's just like how the market's going to evolve. And
I think it can be. There's a lot of startups actually that are building really fascinating embedded fintech products. So I do think that there's good opportunity there. And then the largest enterprises are also coming into the market there. So everybody's adding a X Pay or X Wallet, and every large technology company is trying to do that too. So I still think there's a lot of space for innovation. At the earliest phases, there are some interesting and fun new concepts. I think we're going to see another wave, but the wave that we're seeing right now is much more B2B oriented as opposed to B2C. So just thinking about how do I build a new and differentiated fraud and risk analytics tool. You can never have too many great fraud tools. And so like there are a bunch of companies that are working on that kind of thing, or other B2B oriented products.
Do you have a pet idea?
Oh, I have too many, but I can't give them away.
Okay. Well, maybe some good entrepreneur will reach out to you for them. And how do you think Plaid started working outside the US recently now?
Yep. US, Canada, UK, and then 17 countries in Europe, including the Nordics.
Oh, wow.
So continue to expand our European coverage, and then we will go further internationally over time. Largely, we're listening to where our customers want to go. It should be no surprise to you, but in, call it 2022, a lot of the companies that had big, ambitious internationalization plans slowed down.
Yep.
Those are not gone. They'll turn them back on soon.
Yeah.
And we're really there to follow our customers.
Makes sense. So have you read that book, 7 Powers?
I have. I love it.
Like, if you were to do auto analysis on Plaid, like what would be your auto analysis?
Okay. So let's see. Initially, Plaid was great at counter positioning. We talked about the developer first concept, kind of putting our docs online, so on and so forth. So initially, like very strong counter positioning. We have some aspects of scale economies. I think like all the integrations that we've done to the banks, like as we get bigger and bigger and the cost of that goes down, that certainly is true. Network effects is pretty big in our business, and I would say that's the primary driver of power to Plaid. We've created a system such that once a user links a bank account once, they don't have to go through the same friction to connect it the second time or the third time or the nth time. The average consumer on our platform links 3 to 5 applications in their lifetime, and that number is going up, by the way. And so, if you've already connected to Venmo and then you want to connect to Coinbase, it's way easier to connect to Coinbase because you've already done that Venmo connection. So we have a kind of an increased conversion rate for Coinbase, and that is coming from the consumer network effect. And then we also get a lot of network effects from the businesses that we work with. So we have a product called Beacon, where all of our customers are contributing back their fraud data that they've seen. So if you commit fraud on Venmo, then Coinbase is going to hear about it. So like we can actually start to build a fraud consortium behind it. There's a bunch of pretty much all of the products that we launch are based on this concept of like unique network oriented data. So network effects are really big.
That sounds pretty strong. Yeah.
It's a good one. Yeah. I like to think that I'm a cornered resource as well, but we can debate that one.
Yeah. Well, at least in the resources of entrepreneurs with like long hair,
there we go.
Pretty cornered the market there. But okay, that's a pretty good analysis. I think that's Yeah, I think the network effects, as you said, that's pretty strong.
Yeah.
And probably helps with a lot of the scaling stuff too, if you don't need to reconnect to the banks every time and
Exactly. So,
all
wait, so
that.
what were the other ones? Process power is one. I think there's probably
Process
less scalable.
power, scale
That's fine.
economies.
Scale economies, yes, very light.
Then there, yeah, counter position you mentioned, network effects. Then you have brand. There's some with brand starting to.
Yeah.
I mean, like, don't you like trusting Plaid as a place you
Totally.
can actually give your like financial credentials?
I mean, my long-term ambition is that Plaid is an ingredient brand that consumers trust. And so we have work to do to get there. Like we focus a lot on consumer trust. Right now, I think we have a lot of trust from the developer community. But we have work to do on the consumer side.
Is there a consumer place that like I can log in and see like where all my accounts are connected?
There is,
and
yeah.
like, okay.
We have a portal that you can go to. You can see all the account connections that you have. It can kind of give you security updates there. And so
Is that place you guys are going to develop more, kind of growing it up?
I'd like to, yes.
And what about fuck ups? What are some of the biggest fuck ups you guys?
Oh man,
Sometimes.
so many. Hopefully all minor. But first is the class of like personnel and hiring mistakes. So not hiring execs fast enough. We already talked about that one a little bit. Not knowing how to do certain functions. So like we have a very good go-to-market team now. I didn't know how to do go-to-market at first, so I built it totally wrong. And then I hired someone that was great at building go-to-market teams, and they built it totally right, and they fixed it. So, there's all sorts of these like
any big strategic mistakes that wasn't like.
I think all of those are in the scale of like caught early and adjusted. So we've invested in product areas that we shut down that were a strategic mistake. On the flip side, was it really a strategic mistake to make that kind of a bet?
Try, right?
I'm not sure. Yeah, exactly. So like,
yeah, I mean,
we're trying to
gotta
scope
try,
it pretty
right?
well. The one thing that it's not a mistake in any sense, but I asked one of my first board members to do this, where every time he saw me, he said, "Zach, what's the number one thing that's not making the business go faster?" And he's asked me this question for like 9 years now, like every time he sees me. And now it's not every time, but for a while it's every time he saw me. And that question is, it's a really good focusing question. And to have someone that's on your board that like, feels like they have authority, like really asking you and then not letting you go with a bad answer, like making you get to a really good answer. That's been really helpful in helping us kind of try to avoid some of the big strategic mistakes.
General theme I'm thinking a lot through is like people see a story of a company like Plaid or Brex, like successful outcome, right? Like, and it's hard to distill, so like, what are the few things that kind of went really right? You know what I mean? And for me, like hearing the story now from the beginning, I'm going to try to repeat some of them and you add to it and correct me if I'm wrong. But at least the way I listened to it was a little bit started like, look, you two were kind of early-ish in the tech scene in New York. There wasn't a lot of stuff. I imagine being close to the banks, was that like a thing that like you think influenced it or no?
No, I don't think so at all, actually. I wish it had.
Yeah.
But the banks, we were 23 and 24. The banks didn't want to talk to us.
Was it even like being in the like thinking about financial stuff of being New York or no?
Being near Occupy Wall Street, certainly. Like that was definitely a push for us. And frankly, having friends that were in the ad industry in New York made us think about building a more data-centric business, because the ad business is a very data-centric.
Yeah, very data-heavy. Yeah, okay. So you guys were in New York, Occupy Wall Street, and you try to do all these consumer applications, and B2B was the place that hit. And I think it seems to be the first thing that you guys got right there, because like Yodlee already existed, quote unquote, but it was this kind of like developer first, similar to what Stripe was doing a little bit too, where like a developer first kind of like mentality, focus on startups, focusing on like net new, which wasn't something that was a playbook at the time, I imagine, right? Like it was like, hey, sell to big companies. That's the only place there's money. There wasn't like sell to startups and grow with them. Was that?
That was a big part of it, yeah. Like figuring out how to sell to early startups, figuring out how to identify the product leaders within large organizations and sell to them.
And kind of sell. It was like always like you're trying to sell to existing business that was big instead of like trying to like create these almost net new.
Yeah.
Then for me, it was like super impressive. You guys grinded it out for years until it started going, right? Like it was a few years until it kind of hit that kind of like escape velocity. And then the size of the fintech market growing so much, I think that was something that went very right and worked out. You guys have like huge market share, right?
we have a lot of competitors that are out there, and we've always been in like a fairly fiercely competitive market. The market's evolved a lot. So at first it was us competing with Yodlee and Finicity and MX and a bunch of these other kind of companies that are building screen scrapers. Then we were helpful in shifting the industry towards more API-driven integrations, and then we saw a bunch of new entrants come in. So we compete with Mastercard now and Visa and Stripe and like all of these others that have built kind of these bank linking. And then when we look internationally, there's a ton of other competitors that are out there. Over time for us, I mean, we've tried to use this concept of focus to really win the mind share of the people that really matter the most to us. So for the customers in the narrow segment of the industry that we really want to focus on, we want them to know Plaid. We like really push on, how do we get in front of them? And we're doing things that don't scale there. So I'm literally still cold emailing people to say, hey, I saw this new interesting feature that you launched. Like, I'd love to tell you about Plaid. Like, can we have a conversation about that? And so trying to stay really, really top of mind with the right people. So if it feels like we have, a lot of market share, it's because you're in that demographic of people that I really want to know about Plaid.
Makes sense.
But again, it's a big market and there's a bunch of competitors.
Makes sense. So yeah, I guess like part of it, but I guess the power stuff they were describing before is it's a real thing, right? Like when I think it's not someone comes and just copies your APIs, like, they won't have all the consumer trust and they won't have all the consumer connections and the bank connections and things like that. I think that seemed like a big piece. And then
one aspect that I always tend to come back to, and the one thing that I really want to still instill within the company and with startups that I talk to is, for a lot of Plaid, it was just about grinding. And whenever we can find problems where it's about grinding, like, we're so happy because,
interesting.
My philosophy on building startups is, if you are in at all the right market, and you're willing to put in the work, like, chances are you'll have a pretty good outcome. So for us, when we find those challenges of how do we integrate with all these banks, or like how do we actually build this like really technically complex, super hard thing, like those get us excited.
What are some examples of like the grindies of the early kind of Plaid that you think like were really no one wanted to do at the time?
Well, we go back to, we raised $60,000 and we were basically like out of money. And like, how do we keep this thing alive for 2 years on $60,000? All right, like you grind, you like spend basically no money,
totally.
You like really fight to get to the next phase. Or we've now finally had this API platform and no one wants to use it because the customer that said they were going to buy it is stuck in procurement for 6 months or 9 months, maybe even. All right, well, we're going to go to a hackathon. Like we're going to go do that. Or like even now we're working on this kind of cash flow credit score. Those kinds of like grind it out to create a big type of change problems, like those excite us.
Interesting. Yeah, I can kind of see that because like I just think about pitching my engineers and like something that startup scraping. They're like, no, it's always going to be like a whack-a-mole game, like some bank is going to change their page and then you have to do, and that's for you, it was the opportunity, right? You were like, yeah, that's why other people don't do it. That's like where the opportunity is.
It's where we're going to be better than anyone else, or at least where we were in the early days. Now we're very much focused on converting all the banks to APIs.
No, of course.
But like we love those challenges where, the proper combination of effort and yes, intelligence and smart decisions. But really where like the proper application of effort can create a differential outcome. Like we love those challenges.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I guess like anything that I missed in the story of like, hey, this was actually like a really important moment or a really important thing about the industry or insight that, we kind of didn't touch on.
I'm sure there are tons. Nothing that comes to mind.
Hopefully not tons, you know what I mean? Like
I'm sure there are like tons. You get into the little decisions, the key points.
But nothing like big that comes to mind. That was like kind of like a super well, and retention too. I think the other piece too is like you guys took care of the customers for a long time, right?
We do. Yeah, we spend a lot of time with our customers. I talk to our customers every day, and for us, like we're fortunate that the customers that started with us are still with us. Like our customer turnover only really occurs when a customer goes out of business or shuts down a line of business that use Plaid. So Brex has been a customer for a long time. Yes. I hope you're a customer for a few more decades, and
we'll be forever for a long time. Yeah, 100%. To wrap it up with a little bit more like a reflective question, but obviously when people have success, right, like they change, and some of the changes are positive because you evolve, you learn, and some of it, not as positive, and you're trying to like fight back and kind of keep that grindy mentality from the beginning. And I love that. Does something come to mind to you when thinking about that, of like, what about the Zach of 2012 or you want to kind of keep, and what are the things that you you're happy that you evolved?
I'm happy I evolved in a bunch of different ways. If you remember, Zach, in 2012, actually, we didn't know each other in 2012, but I used to have really short hair, so I have much longer hair. So
Yeah,
hopefully
that evolution
keep my hair for a long
stayed.
time. Bunch of different things. I mean, I think the things that I hope stick around are, the greediness, the grindiness, like the willing to get into the details, the desire to stay really focused. Humility is like a core value of mine, and I hope I always stay really humble. And the deep desire to kind of create a positive change in the world, be that for our customers or be that for consumers or be that for kind of anyone I interact with. I hope all that stuff, stays with me for a long time. So maybe I'll listen to this recording and think about it. The things that have changed a lot, I've gained a much broader perspective of the world and how to think about kind of putting my focus into the right category. So it used to be, everything that was wrong, I might dive in and want to think about how we might make that better. But within the company, I've learned to step back and say, there are certain things that really matter and others that don't. I think, surrounding myself with just really intelligent people, being able to have this kind of conversation with you and being able to call you for advice or feedback on other things is like a really wonderful thing. And one of the things that unites me, I think, since I created my Twitter handle in like 2012, like the tagline's been always learning. And I think that kind of like unites a lot of both what I had when I was a really little kid, like to reading a lot of books, like all the way through now and hopefully for the future. So
yeah, I think this is one of the few things that like you meet a lot of successful people and it's like this one common trait. You just see this like always learning mode or curiosity, right? It's crazy how it's, people can be successful in a lot of different ways, but this is the one that like you kind of need to do it, I think.
I always have to be getting better.
Always be learning. Awesome, man. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for doing this. This was fun.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to my conversation with Zach. We'll be back next time with another look inside the minds of the biggest names in business. HD and HD is produced by me, Henrique Dubugras, in association with Pod People.